Welcome to the CommunicationDiva Podcast, episode 25. Today's podcast is an interview with Karen McAndless-Davis, an author and counselor who works with women who have been abused by their partners. When communication ends and power and control take over, however you slice it, it comes out violence.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Communication Diva, the podcast that tries to help you communicate better, more efficiently, more easily, in the hopes that your relationships with others will improve. My name is Jenn Swanson, and I am very pleased to be here with you today. I know that I missed a week of podcasting, and there was a very good reason for that. I was in New York City, and I was attending Blog World and New Media Expo, and that was an absolutely fantastic time. I've come back with a cold, as you might hear in my voice in the interview today, but it was worth all the lack of sleep and jet lag and all of the rest of it because it was a fantastic conference. So here I am back onto the regular schedule. You can hear this podcast on iTunes, BlackBerry, Zune, and Stitcher Smart Radio. And if you don't know what Stitcher Smart is, you can go to our website, www.communicationdiva.com. You will see a big button on the right-hand side. You can click on that and download the free Stitcher app to any of your mobile devices. And this will allow you to custom tailor a radio station playlist with all of your favorite podcasts. And so I encourage you to do that. If you put in the promo code Jenn Swanson, Jenn Swanson, all one word, I will receive $1 for each person that does that. So I thank you in advance if that's you. Today's episode is an interview with author and counselor Karen McAndless-Davis. And the book she has co-authored is called When Love Hurts. And I will put a link to that on the website. And this is a very important work. And I think you will find some interesting information in this interview with Karen. Karen works and has worked with women who have been abused by their partners for more than 16 years now. And she works not only with women who have been physically abused, but also with women who have been verbally and emotionally hurt by their partners. The topic that we are going to be speaking about today is communication and the abusive person. How to tell if the person you are in relationship with is abusive by the way they communicate. And Karen is speaking today specifically about her work with these women who have been abused by male partners, but much of what she has to say can be applied to abusive people in other contexts, such as the workplace, workplace bullying, and many other areas. So I am very excited to bring you this interview. I'm not going to say any more about that, and I will turn you right over to episode 25 of Communication Diva. Okay, so Karen, thank you for taking the time today to have this conversation with me. And I just wanted to start off by asking you how long you've been doing this work.
I've been working with women who have experienced abuse from their partner for 16 years. And I work one-on-one with women, and I also facilitate groups for women in various communities. Oh, and wrote a book on the topic, When Love Hurts, on the topic.
Great, good. So we'll talk about the book a little bit later, but so these are women who have been abused by their partners. Who are these people? Like, how do they find you, and where are they in the process?
Well, they're women like you and I. They're women from every background, every age range. Some women have only been married a short while. Many women have been married a long time to their partners. And they're in various places in their process. Some women are just starting to wonder if what they're experiencing is abuse. Some women have left their partners, but are dealing with all the aftermath of that. So really the whole spectrum.
Okay, and it doesn't particularly follow any cultural demographic or anything?
No, not at all. And in fact, the majority of women I work with are middle class, Canadian, well-educated, professional women. But it does affect women from every race and every religion and the whole range.
What have the women that you work with taught you about how abusive people communicate?
Well, it seems to me from really listening to hundreds of women's stories that abusive men, their partners, have really different motives and goals when they enter into a conversation or a disagreement or an argument. That the women come to that exchange really wanting to understand the other person and wanting to be understood, wanting to share information and to listen to what the other person has to say. But what I really see the man is doing, his motive seems to be to control the conversation, to use it as an opportunity to put her down, belittle her, confuse things. I think of communication as an opportunity to try to bring about clarity, and they seem to muddy the waters and bring in irrelevant issues and twist things around and blame the woman. So, I don't think they communicate in the way that you and I might think of communication. I think they see it as an opportunity to hurt and to disempower and to control. So a really different motive.
And are there particular tactics that are common to some of this communication or non-communication?
Yeah. Well, I think they think of words as weapons. So again, you and I think non-abusive people think of words as a really helpful tool for building relationship and communicating ideas. But I think they think of words as weapons. And so they actually think of, and we know this from some of the counselors who've worked with abusive men, that some abusive men anyways will admit that they think of the most hurtful thing they can say. So if the woman is overweight, he knows she's sensitive about that. He will bring that up at every opportunity. If for non-abusive people, if they know that something is a sensitive issue to someone they care about, they are going to avoid that, right? They're going to be protective of that. So they use words as weapons. If they know the woman is sensitive about her mother, maybe your mother has some mental illness, he's going to bring that up. You're crazy, just like your mother. They use words to put down, belittle. They confuse things. They deny things. So for example, maybe he said to her, I'll stay with the kids on Friday night. You can go out with the girls. Friday night comes around. He says, I never said that. And that happens over and over and over again. And because the woman wants to believe the best of her partner, she wants to believe that he's telling the truth. So these would be some of the common tactics that I hear from women.
And how can a woman figure out whether or not it's an abusive situation or just a really difficult person to live with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think fear is a good determining factor. I think of it as the fear factor. If the woman is afraid in the relationship, if she's afraid to raise her concerns, if she's afraid to say, that the kids need new running shoes, if she's afraid to just communicate the basic information, or to even raise a touchy issue, maybe to have to talk about finances. If she's afraid she's going to be attacked, verbally attacked by raising those things, she's being abused, I would say. If she finds that no matter how hard she works, no matter how hard she tries to clarify things and sort things out and work together, that nothing ever gets better, that might be a good indicator as well.
And we're talking mostly about male-female relationships here, and people in a couple situation. Do you ever come across people who feel like they're being abused in a workplace setting or a different kind of a relationship other than an intimate one?
Yeah, I have worked with some people in that context too. I think particularly some people who were being abused in the workplace, or sometimes the words bully is helpful actually too in those contexts. And actually that's helpful for women sometimes too, as they think about their partners, that their partners are like bullies in the house. And the dynamics are really similar, really. Typically one person has more power than the other person. And power can come in many forms, right? It can be physical, but it can also be social, who has more credibility. It can be financial, for sure. That's a big factor. So in any situation where one person has more power than the other person, if the person with more power uses their position to try to control the other person and have power over the other person, then they're really abusing their power and their position. So it's a pretty similar dynamic, I think, actually.
And there are all sorts of. I heard recently of a website that had to be shut down. It was a volunteer website, and it was for workplace bullying, and it was overwhelmed. It actually crashed a couple of times, and the people that were running it as volunteers had to shut it down because it was becoming a full-time job with no income. Wow. As a result of how many people out there were doing that in the workplace. But as far as relationships, couples, intimate relationships, the thinking would be that maybe the female or the woman would have a part responsibility in that. I mean, I've heard that before. What do you say about that?
It's a really common misunderstanding or myth, maybe, that women have some part in that they push their partner's buttons, or somehow they could make it better, or maybe that she's too much of a doormat and she needs to stand up to him. And women actually come into our groups carrying those ideas because they're so prevalent in society that women end up carrying them. And so one of the things we ask the woman is what have you tried to see this abuse stop? And women try everything, absolutely everything. They try counseling for themselves. They go to couple counseling. They try to just be accommodating and kind of not rock the boat, or they try to draw a line and insist that he be respectful to her. And no matter what she does, and no matter what counseling they do, unless he does specific counseling for people who are abusive, it's not going to change. And in fact, over time, it will get worse. So we really believe that abusive men are 100% responsible for the abuse in the relationship, and the woman can't do anything to change that. She can think about what she can do to try to increase her emotional safety or the emotional safety of the kids. But even that's very difficult, because if he's controlling the money and various other things, her options are sometimes really limited.
So what are the long-term effects of not ending a relationship like that, or not getting some help with dealing with something like this? What happens to some of these women?
Well, a lot of impact. We talk about impact. The woman experiences a lot of emotional impact. Her self-worth will go down. Often she'll experience depression or anxiety. Really common women talk to us about panic attacks or things like insomnia, eating too much or too little, lots and lots of things. And certainly physical health too. Like I think we kind of immediately think about the emotional impact, but there's physical impact for sure. Women talk about chronic migraines, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome. Like it just impacts her body in various ways. It impacts her ability to parent in the way that she wants to. If she's emotionally spent because of all this abuse, she often doesn't have the emotional energy she'd like to bring to the task of parenting. Can impact her ability to work. Sometimes he just makes it so difficult to work by discouraging her from doing that. Or he can also sabotage her workplace place by calling all the time or showing up all the time. So really, truly, every aspect of her life gets impacted by this. What I always say to women is they are having a normal human reaction to, if you live with someone like this is the normal human reaction that people have. The good news is that if a woman can get some distance from that abuse, and that might just be for a while, that might be going and staying at her sister's house for a while, or it might be a more permanent separation. What we find is that impact starts to lift off the woman. You know, the migraine, she stops having so many migraines. She begins to be able to sleep more and so on. So that's the good news. It's not a permanent kind of damage. It's an impact from the abuse. And when she gets some distance from that, she begins to feel better. But some of that can take a long time. You know, her sense of herself, if part of the abuse has been a constant attacking of herself and her abilities, that takes a long time to recover from. Now, I think I'll share an example with you, Jen, if I could. There was a woman in our group who'd been there for a number of weeks, like we were probably at week 7 or 8. And kind of out of the blue, she apologized to us. She said, I know I have a really difficult accent, and I know I speak English really poorly. And we all just stared at her dumbfounded because this woman had no discernible accent from the rest of the group, and her English was flawless, right? And so we asked her what she was talking about. And she said, well, you know, I'm French Canadian. And, you know, my husband's always said that I have a really thick accent and that my English is really poor. And we were just shocked. Like, this was a woman who was speaking perfect English, right? So that would be part of the impact, right? And when you think about what kind of, and so, being told that she's stupid, being corrected on her grammar all the time, being told that she doesn't make any sense. Like, a lot of women come in thinking they don't make any sense because their partner is always saying to them, you know, oh, you're crazy. And we always say to women, you make perfect sense to me. In fact, the women in our group are incredibly articulate. You know, I would say if there's anything that might distinguish them from the general population, they may be more articulate than the general population. Because if you're living with an abusive person who uses words as a weapon to try to undermine you all the time, you get really good at speaking very clearly. So, you know, this woman, after she'd been away from her partner for a while, she actually went back to school and she completed a master's degree really, really quite smoothly, right? So that would be a concrete example of the kind of impact. And, you know, if she didn't have us as a group to really correct the distorted picture she had of herself, like, she might have carried that for a really long time, right?
So a real crushing to the self-esteem and the self-concept, it sounds like. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What does society say about this? Because, you know, you hear things like, you know, the man who wears the pants in the family and all this stuff. Does society and the way the media has in the past and even to some extent today treat the male-female difference, does that have any impact on this whole thing?
Well, for sure, I think it does. I think we live in a really interesting and kind of bizarre time. I think on one level, we act as if women and men have full equality, and yet they don't in so many ways. And I think a lot of the inequality is invisible, which makes it really difficult. Men still have a lot of financial power, which has a huge implication. They also, it really seems to me like they have a lot of social power that I don't think people realize. And why I say that is that, you know, if an incident of verbal abuse gets really very extreme, and let's say the police are called, the police will separate the man and the woman, and they'll listen to both stories, and they will typically go with the man's version of the stories. Really? Yeah. Yeah. Now, this, in terms of the police, this is changing. You know, I've been doing this work for 16 years. When I first started doing this work, all I ever heard was negative stories about police. Now I hear about half positive and half negative. But as women move through the legal system, again, judges seem to believe the man instead of the woman, you know, if they're moving towards separation and they're looking at custody of the kids and those kinds of things. So I think there's still a lot of social power. And so women end up very isolated, very judged. They're often held responsible for the breakdown of the marriage, when in fact they're not responsible. Their partner's 100% responsible. But the woman, if the woman chooses to leave, then she's judged for that leaving. So we really have a long way to go still, for sure.
Now, I had a man come into the church that I work at when I was very new there a few years ago. And he was completely distraught, and I had to go do the service and didn't have time to sit down and talk with him much. But he was being abused by his wife, which was, and one of the things he said to me that has stuck with me forever is that he said, if I was a woman or I was gay, there would be help for me. But he says, I'm a big, strong, strapping man who works in a logging camp. And he says, I can't talk about this with anybody because they laugh at me. And he said, I'm seen to be less of a man because I'm terrified of my wife. And she was doing things. She was involved with a gang, and she was following him around, and she was threatening him, and he was living in his car at this point. And so we ended up, finding someone he could talk to. But that sort of opened my eyes a little bit to the fact that it's maybe not all, the one-sided.
Yeah, for sure. And over the years, I've worked with a couple men as well, and I do one-on-one counseling with men. So, if a man's listening to this podcast and this is ringing true for him, I'd be happy to hear from him. So it's important to say that absolutely does happen. And, but it's also important to say that statistically that is in fact much more rare. All the research points to cases where the man is abusive to the woman over 90% of the time.
Wow.
So it's really high. Mm-hmm. And in Canada, 1 in 4 women will be actually physically assaulted by their partners over the course of their lifetime. So that's really, really high. 1 in 9 women will have breast cancer over her lifetime. 1 in 4 women will be physically assaulted by her partner. So, the numbers are staggering. If this was a disease, we'd absolutely be talking about an epidemic. So, that's why I put the emphasis where I put the emphasis. And I also think there is really a false belief that the support and resources are there for women. They if that man found that they weren't there for him, they weren't there for women either. I work with women who absolutely are sleeping in their cars. Our transition houses are often full. Women can't get in. That's new. When I first started doing work, they could always call around and they would eventually find a bed for a woman. They're now turning women away who completely qualify and should be able to come in. And even, a transition house is 30 days and then there's nothing, typically. Sometimes some women can get into second stage housing. And since I brought us around to transition houses, it's maybe good to say that that transition houses are shelters. Most other provinces and the U.S. talk about shelters for women, are there for women who've experienced any form of abuse from their partner. Not just for women who've been physically assaulted by their partner. And that's really important for people to realize. A certain percentage of men who are abusive will never hit their partners. Middle-class professional men know if I hit my partner, there will be consequences. But they can control their partners in every other way. Financially is always a big one, and verbally, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, in many, many other ways. They don't have to hit their partners to have control and fear reign in their house. So it's just important for people to know that if a woman is not feeling safe where she is and she needs to get out, that a transition house or a shelter is a good first call. And also that they see themselves as a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week resource, that they're happy to take calls from women who aren't planning to come in, but are just wanting to find out, where would a support group be in my community? Can you recommend a lawyer to me? Those kinds of questions, they're really happy to field as well.
So the word qualify just jumped out at me. How would you, if you're not being physically abused, how would you quantify? How would you, show or explain or prove, I guess, that, like, what would be some of the questions that would be asked of somebody who was wanting to find help and support?
Well, the transition houses that I know, they're just looking for women who are leaving an abusive relationship and don't have housing. So all they're really trying to screen out is women who don't have housing for some other reason, right? Those women also need housing, but if they have just failed to pay their rent and they're losing their house, right? So if a woman is experiencing abuse, then she qualifies for that. So for a woman to figure out, kind of how serious is this abuse, doing an inventory might be really helpful. And there's an inventory in our book, When Love Hurts. I think there's an inventory on our website also, and we'll give that information at the end. And also to think about, what is the impact on the woman? Like a simple exercise might be for her to sit and write, how has his abusive, controlling, bullying behavior impacted me? How has it impacted me emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually? And if you're being impacted negatively, then it needs to be taken seriously. So
I think one of the things in looking at your book that surprised me the most was the variety of different ways in which abuse can be exhibited, and one of them was financial. And are there people that don't realize that they're actually in an abusive relationship? They just think they're living with somebody who's impossible, and how do you help clarify that?
That might be a good definition of living with an abusive person, someone who's impossible. We talk about actually 12 different types of abuse. And it's really common that women think that, or don't think that they're being abused. We have this stereotype that abused women are, I don't know exactly what the stereotype is, but they're lower income, maybe they're immigrant women, they're not educated, and they have a black eye or a broken bone. Really, honestly, I've yet to meet this stereotype. Those are not the women I meet. I've never met a woman who had a black eye in all my time of doing this work. And that's partly because if a man actually is physically abusive at all, he will do so in a way that's not evident, right? He will bruise her on the arms, underneath her sleeves, that kind of thing, so people don't see it. Which is, among other things, an indicator that he actually has a lot of control and choice in what he's doing.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is fascinating. Actually, I think you must find this frustrating at times, and I wonder what would bring this into consciousness. The public consciousness more, other than just talking about it. And because I would imagine that the statistics would be stunning to most people.
Yeah, we do have to bring this more into the consciousness. And so I appreciate you doing this interview. I do think we need to talk about it more. I think we need to listen to women's stories more. And we have some of the women's stories on our website. One of the challenges really is that the women can't tell their stories publicly. Often they have children in common. There will absolutely be repercussions if they tell any part of their story. They get threatened with being sued if they say anything. Like, the women are really silenced in a lot of ways. And so we actually bring women to speak live in various settings, in universities and churches and so on, but it has to be a somewhat controlled. If some of the women I've worked with could put their stories in the newspaper or be interviewed on the radio, we'd see a real shift. We know people who have had breast cancer, for example, or other illnesses, and people can talk about it, and people begin to understand and be sympathetic. This is a really invisible issue at this point, even though it's impacting a huge number of women. It needs to change. And I have hope that it will change. In my lifetime, it used to be acceptable to drink and drive. It's not acceptable anymore. 20 years ago, when I started as a pastor, if someone had breast cancer in the congregation, I would never say that out loud in the pulpit. And now we talk about breast cancer pretty openly, and we see pink ribbons everywhere. So change can happen by conversation, by sharing ideas, but we have a long way to go.
And so then if change can happen, what about the abusive men? If someone really did have a light bulb go on and figure out, oh, okay, I need to change. I need to, I'm sure most of the abusive men don't see themselves that way. What can happen with them? Is there help for someone who's an abuser to rehabilitate and to change and to have a loving, mutual relationship?
Yeah, change is possible, and we have a Stir of Change on our website as well. A man who's abusive has to really want to change, and he needs to seek out a counselor who has specific training in that area. It's really quite specific, because the work has to be at the belief level. The man has a belief system about him needing to be superior and him needing to be entitled, and that belief system has to really be changed if any behavior is going to change. So they need specific counseling. But it is possible. I do know some men who have changed and are now loving and respectful partners. Statistically, it doesn't happen very often. One of my colleagues in the States who works with abusive men all the time, she would say about 2% of the men that she works with change. And these are the men who actually come into the program. So it doesn't happen very often. So, for women maybe listening at this point and maybe thinking about their relationship, of course, each woman has to find the evidence for herself, and I really respect that. And in my experience, women want to really try everything before giving up on a relationship. But just to know, statistically, it doesn't happen. And so, if a woman's not seeing a high level of motivation and really pursuing change on his part, if he's kind of more digging his heels in and saying, "This is the way I am, and I'm never going to change," then he's probably never going to change.
All right. Can you tell me about the book that you've written now?
Yeah, I co-authored a book with Jill Corey, and the book is When Love Hurts, and it's for women who have experienced abuse in relationship. We talk about all different types of abuse, and there's a good checklist in there about that. And the starting point really for the book is a woman trying to sort out, am I experiencing abuse? And if so, what type of abuse and to what extent? So the book walks the woman through that. How we came to write the book was we took the material that we use in our support groups and we just laid it out in a self-help format. So it's very interactive. There's exercises. There's places to write in the book. So the woman can get some of the benefit of being in a support group. Oh, and there's also lots of women's stories in that book. And women tell us all the time that they really resonate with the stories. They read those other women's stories and they go, wow, this is so much like my story. Because actually the patterns of abuse are very similar. We sometimes joke in group that, like, did these guys all go to the same college to learn these moves? Because they use the same tactics and the same strategies. And so what seems like just crazy making behavior to a woman and she thinks, oh, this just must be my partner, right? To then hear other women are experiencing this too, it really helps to overcome the isolation, I think, and the crazy making and the woman thinking that there must be something really wrong with her. So, in terms of our book, you can get it online through Chapters or Amazon. And you can come to our website, which is whenlovehurts.ca. And our blog, we have an ongoing blog there, lots of information. And if people want to get in touch with me for any reason, they can do that through our website also.
Yeah, and I will put links to all of that information on the show notes at www.CommunicationDiva.com. So, Karen, do you have any last words of advice to someone who might be listening to this, who might be wondering or thinking or knows that they are being abused?
Well, reach out for help and reach out to appropriate people. Some women tell us that for 10 years they looked for help and they went to various counselors, or maybe they talked to their pastor, and everyone just misnamed it. People misnamed it as a communication issue when it's not actually a communication issue. So if you think this is happening, reach out to appropriate help, and as I said, calling a transition house or a shelter to find a counselor in your community that specializes in this area. Unfortunately, counselors will say that they know about abuse when they don't. Most counseling degrees don't actually cover material about abuse. So you really want to know that the person knows what they're talking about. I hate to plug my book again, but I think our book is a really great starting point to get some good basic information, and then you can kind of go from there.
Good. Well, thank you very much for this really important topic, and I'm hoping that maybe we can talk again in an upcoming episode.
Thanks a lot for having me, Jenn. I really appreciate it.
So that was Karen McAndless-Davis, and you've been listening to Communication Diva. I will have all of that information on the website, and I hope that you will come over and check it out and give us some feedback on what you think about this topic. And be sure to go over and check out Karen's website, which again is at whenlovehurts.ca. That's CA for Canada. Okay, thank you. And until next time, this is Jenn Swanson. Take care.